Indian Army and Indian Air Force remain locked in a border standoff with the Chinese military, not just in Ladakh, but along the entire 4,056-kilometer long frontier with Tibet. However, inside Tibet, the Chinese CCP is carrying out an unobstructed mission to eradicate Tibetan culture and replace it with the mainstream. A New York Times report has revealed the dark reality behind this Chinese game plan inside Tibet. Chinese CCP has built 90 new border villages in Tibet since 2016 and has used money and muscle power to force Tibetans to abandon their traditional homes and move to these border remote villages. China calls these villages border guardians. Now, the CCP uses the excuse that these remote villages provide a better life to Tibetans. However, that excuse has been shattered once and for all. The NYT claims, quote, China's relocation policy is a form of social engineering designed to assimilate minority groups like the Tibetans into the mainstream, unquote. CCP is socially engineering the Tibet region to change its demographics and to eradicate the Tibetan culture and identity. NYT report adds further, quote, Tibetans who are largely Buddhist have historically resisted the Communist Party's intrusive controls on their religion and way of life, unquote. This is true, as the 13th Dalai Lama declared Tibet as a free and independent country in 1913, only for China to launch a military invasion in the 1950s. Tibetans then fought a war for independence in 1959, but lost to a more powerful PLA. Now, the Chinese CCP is crushing Tibetan identity. NYT report further adds, quote, Tibetan or Buddhist monasteries and temples are seemingly nowhere to be found. Instead, national flags and portraits of Mr. Xi are everywhere on light poles, living room walls, and balcony railings, unquote. Now, it's a really detailed investigative report by the New York Times, and I would recommend everyone to read it fully for yourself. The fact that China is building villages is not that alarming, but to use this tactic in an occupied country like Tibet to change the population demographics is surely alarming. Tibet, which as a country has over 2,000 years of history, it had its own language, culture, economy, songs and stamps, but soon all will be lost forever under the CCP dictatorship, and the global powers will be guilty of abandoning the Tibetan people. They want to transform the landscape and the population, unquote, revealed Matthew Akester to NYT. He's an independent researcher on Tibet. The damning report adds that Chinese CCP has been forcing Tibetans to sell their land, sheep and yak to move to these remote border villages. These Tibetans have no means to earn a livelihood. Robert Barnett, who is a professor in the SOAS University of London, adds, quote, the majority problem is that they are moving them from one lifestyle to another. They end up with no capital, no usable skills, no sellable skills, and no cultural familiarity, unquote. These claims are backed by a United Nations report released just last year in 2023, which highlights forced assimilation of 1 million Tibetan children. You can see this report on the UNHRC website. It says, quote, we are very disturbed that in recent years, the residential school system for Tibetan children appears to act as a mandatory large-scale program intended to assimilate Tibetans into majority Han culture, contrary to international human rights standards, unquote. Not just that, the UN report adds that China is actively cracking down on anyone promoting the Tibetan cause. UN experts added, quote, initiatives to promote Tibetan language and culture are reportedly being suppressed, and individuals advocating for Tibetan language and education are persecuted, unquote. Now, one such village is Kuyongning New Village. It is situated on land claimed by India as Arunachal Pradesh, but also claimed by China as South Tibet. It sits on a piece of land 10,000 feet above sea level and had never been previously settled. Only tribal hunters used to visit this region. Now, this new village has small homes and paved roads, but there is no means of earning a livelihood. But since not many want to move there, China is paying Tibetans around $3,000 to abandon their own traditional homes, and other times, intimidation tactics are also used. 11 such new Chinese villages are in areas claimed by the tiny Bhutan, with half of these bordering the strategic Doklam Plateau. The other group is focused in the northern remote regions of Bhutan, which China is using as a leverage to force Bhutan to compromise on the Doklam Plateau. India cannot let that happen, as it poses a threat to the Siliguri Corridor, or the Chicken's Neck, connecting mainland India to its northeastern states. Bhutan is barely 38,000 square kilometers in size. It is the 136th largest country in the world compared to China, which is 9.7 million square kilometers and is the third largest nation if we also include occupied Tibet. Now, there should be no dispute between the two as China has more than enough land. But sadly, the CCP regime is still arm twisting this tiny Himalayan nation to compromise more territory. This is infamous Chinese salami slicing on full display. It's the Chinese PLA policy to bully any smaller or weaker nation with the threat of a conflict while actually avoiding war. We are seeing the same Chinese playbook in the South China Sea, where China has rejected to recognize the maritime boundaries of the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, or even Brunei. In Tibet, China continues to build new homes and expand these settlements further. All this has been revealed in this detailed report by the New York Times, who worked with an AI company, RAIC Labs, to evaluate thousands of satellite images that had been taken by Planet Labs of China's remote borders. Comparing old images to new ones have revealed the Chinese game plan. Most of these villages in Tibet are along mountain passes within touching distance of borders claimed by India, Bhutan, and Nepal. According to the report, while most villages are civilian in nature, they also serve a military purpose. Images have captured armored vehicles in these villages along with storage depots and shooting ranges. China's new border villages on disputed territory have caused a concern and raised alarm bells. In 2017, Indian troops halted such a Chinese construction activity on land claimed by Bhutan. Bhutan has a defense pact with New Delhi under which India provides security for its smaller Himalayan neighbor. Brahma Chilani, a strategic affairs analyst, was quoted by the New York Times saying, quote, "What stands out is the speed and stealth with which China is redrawing facts on the ground with little regard for geopolitical fallout. China has been planting settlers in whole new stretches of the Himalayan frontier with India and making them its first line of defense," unquote. Total number of such settlements is estimated to be around 628 in Tibet Autonomous Region, but the focus has been towards Tulungla with 25 villages and Tawang region with 30 such villages known to be the entry points for Arunachal Pradesh and the whole of northeast India. It is the same story in Xinjiang and Yunnan, where 6 new border villages have sprung up but 59 other villages have been expanded. China has often provoked India by claiming parts of Arunachal Pradesh. For the first time, the Modi government hit back by restoring 30 ancient names in Tibet, which existed before the Chinese military invasion in 1950s. Even the US is finally supporting the Tibetan cause. A US delegation, which included Nancy Pelosi, met the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala in India earlier this year. Meanwhile, the US Congress has also passed the Resolve Tibet bill. Earlier this year, in January, 21 member states of the United Nations raised concerns about the human rights situation inside Tibet. These countries include United States, United Kingdom, Japan, Netherlands, New Zealand, France, Germany, Switzerland, and a host of others. They urged a United Nations review of China's indoctrination and cultural genocide in Tibet, including the practice of boarding 1 million Tibetan children away from their families. In fact, the United States even imposed a certain visa curbs on China over such forced assimilation. As expected, China rejected all such claims, with a spokesperson of the Chinese embassy in Washington stating, quote, "Boarding schools have gradually developed into one of the important modes of running schools in China's ethnic minority areas, and the centralized way of running schools effectively solves the problem of ethnic minority students' difficulty in attaining school at a distance where local population and people live scattered," unquote. Overall, experts have called the Chinese border villages and salami slicing tactic as part of a larger grey zone tool from the CCP playbook to assert claims on disputed or weakly controlled areas. For India, the Chinese effort to construct infrastructure so close to India's borders, especially near the strategic chicken's neck, could have long-term security implications as it connects northeast India with the rest of the country. The Siliguri Corridor also houses several Indian Army and Indian Air Force stations, including the Ashimara Air Base, which is the base for the IAF Rafale Squadron. China has continued its efforts to gain a strategic edge near the Siliguri Corridor and the Doklam Plateau in Bhutan, even after the 2020 Galwan Valley clashes in Ladakh. India has responded to Chinese salami slicing by its own Vibrant Villages program. With 455 villages in Arunachal Pradesh and 35 in Ladakh, among other regions, they have been identified for development and upgradation of livelihood generation, road connectivity, housing and infrastructure, renewable energy, and high-speed telecom connectivity. India is also boosting its border military infrastructure with new roads, tunnels and bridges to boost its military presence on the front lines and prevent any further Chinese salami slicing. However, on the international stage, Beijing maintains that it has always been in favor of resolving the border conflict with India, yet Xi Jinping's PLA refuses to respect the pre-2020 status quo ante at the LAC. India's stand has been clear, with External Affairs Minister Jaishankar posting on platform X after a meeting with Wang Yi that China must, quote, ensure full respect for the LAC and past agreements. But while India is capable of safeguarding its own border, inside Tibet, the CCP is carrying out its mass assimilation program unchecked. The question remains, why is Chinese leadership intent on eradicating the Tibetan way of life? Leave a comment, hit the like button and subscribe to Inconnect News.